Hey, I want to ask you about, speaking of going through a lot, the craziness with which the Trump immigration policy involves ICE agents scooping up people and sending them off to these, max prison equivalents in El Salvador. These Venezuelans, we identified it at the time in early reporting, the fact that there were mistakes made. I mean, it seems as though this crew that, shares war plans on Signal, that is sloppy about the way that they're dismantling government, getting rid of a lot of critical government workers alongside whatever they feel is the fraud and abuse. It's just this recklessness. It's an utter disregard, sort of, for doing things in any kind of careful fashion. So, in a way, I'm not surprised that when they scoop up all of these Venezuelans and they tell us that they're all gang members, of course, three of them are not, three that we know of. They're in El Salvador, and the American government is saying, hey, we can't do anything. They're in El Salvador now, and there hasn't even been a phone call on their behalf. Can you speak to this situation and sort of the legal ramifications or limitations or even remedies for this?
Well, this has been as they say, not a bug, but a feature. This wanton cruelty and also indiscriminate treatment without due process. And so, of course, they're going to make mistakes. Now, you remember the famous publicity stunt flight that cost a huge amount of money, more than a regular flight would have, the military flight down there. And that was touted as removing the worst of the worst. It turned out that more than half the people on those flights, the ones that went to Guantanamo, it cost us millions and millions of dollars, and then basically had to all be walked back, including the troops that were sent there at great expense. They were all walked back physically. We're not using Guantanamo, but while they were all gung ho at showing the worst of the worst are going to Guantanamo, um, it turned out that more than half the people on the flight had not been convicted of anything. The worst thing that more than half the people on those flights, Mark, had done was crossing the border without permission, which is a civil wrong. Now we have this fiasco, and this is the one with Chief Judge Boasberg in Washington, D.C., where he said, turn the flights around. They're having a hearing today because they haven't given the court, the federal court, the U.S. government has not given the federal court straight answers. First, they appear to have prevaricated, is a nice way of saying they lied to the court. They hid things from the court, is what it looks like. And then on top of that, they said that they were state secrets. Why a plane left weeks ago from Texas and what time it left and when it got over international waters turns out to be a state secret. Of course, everyone's lampooning that because talking about an attack that's going to be launched on Yemen 2 hours later and being on a group chat, including with a news reporter, that was, of course, no big deal. But telling the judge when this plane left Texas 2 weeks ago, and of course, the reason is it's going to be self-incriminating. I joked before they ought to give those lawyers for DOJ, I guess they're ambitious, they're Trumpsters, they're going into court, and they need to be given a Miranda warning because of course, the answers are going to be that they knew very well about the judge's order, and somebody high up said, what the hell? They called somebody right away, Mark, as soon as the judge issued his oral ruling that said, turn the planes around. And it looks like they could have turned both the planes around at that point and did not. And a third plane that hadn't yet taken off took off. So this has been an utter fiasco. And now, of course, we're treated to the fact that some people were deported based on their tattoos. And if you're harassed by the gang and you're jumped into the gang and you don't want to be a part of a gang and they stick a tattoo on you, guess what? According to the Department of Justice and the INS, without having due process in front of a court or a board, that tattoo alone is enough. In other words, you get a victim tattoo, and that now makes you deportable without any hearing. And that's apparently exactly what happened to this fellow from Maryland. Now, you see, if they had any sense, Mark, like, I was in the Reagan administration, me and a lot of other Democrats, and the way that they tended to proceed was by the rule of law. So if this had happened, let's say, in the Reagan administration, what would have happened was that the three people who have a colorable claim would have been brought right back. Think about it, Mark. You bring them right back. El Salvador is going to bring them right back. They don't need this international incident on their hands. Someone's telling them, do what we say, play hardball, don't ever send them back. We're going to tell the court you have no jurisdiction to bring the person back, even after they were wrongly deported. Now, they're going to lose on that in court. They're going to lose on that in the court of public opinion. And if they wanted to actually, this is what people say, why don't they do anything in a tailored, orderly way? The tailored, orderly way is after a fiasco like that, you bring back anybody that there's a question about. And yes, they say it's a hellhole. It was horrible being down there. They hold a press conference. Okay, you live with that rather than this situation where you say to the federal court, we made an error. We deported the wrong guy. Now he's in a foreign country. You can't do anything about it, Your Honor. Not going anywhere. Just stupid.
So the answer is, and I think you really did kind of address it right away when you said it's a feature, not a bug. The answer is these guys aren't going anywhere. They're going to languish there in that prison. And yeah, right.
Mark, it may be that, the Venezuelan government, they have some money if they want to spend it. They have some oil that they're extracting down there, Maduro in Venezuela. They've apparently sent a pretty good legal team onto this case and made a habeas corpus petition for these folks down in El Salvador. It may be that they send them back to Venezuela. I mean, at some point, we're going to stop paying them all of this money. We're paying all this side money to this El Salvador government and this guy who's in charge down in El Salvador. We're paying him all the side money. At some point, the side money is going to, dry up. You can see it all happening. He gets some oil from Venezuela. They send 10 or 20 of these people back to Venezuela. Now, this whole thing was really sick. This was like a sick, weird thing. Her with the $50,000 Rolex watch. You see it over there?
Yeah, we're showing a picture for those just listening of Kristi Noem standing in front of the prison.
She's kind of tarred up. This is not exactly how you would expect a high government official to appear. And the whole thing, it's like very weird, Mark. If you catch my drift, here are all these guys who are, I guess they're supposed to be showing off their tattoos, but here they are, all bare-chested. It's a horrible prison with the conditions. They put them all in there. That's not like a moment, apparently, that they came to view what was going on. That's how they live 24 hours a day. They don't even get out to have any recreation. This is cruel and unusual punishment on its face. And we have, of course, connived in it. We've colluded in it. We've conspired in it. These are conditions that never would be approved by an American court. And yet we've sent these people without due process into this hellhole.
So maybe it sounds to me like you're hinting eventually there may be a remedy and some of these people will be returned, but it's between now and that remedy, there might be some time. Isn't that?
Well, I think that an American court, of course, has the power to order that they be returned. Then there would be this argument, well, we don't control El Salvador.
That's what they're saying now. We don't control El Salvador. It's absurd.
El Salvador won't control them. Everybody knows this is utterly realistic. If Uncle Sam really wants one of these Central American countries to do something, and it's a matter of sending some prisoners here, there, or the other place, especially they're not even, for the most part, El Salvadorans. So what's really in it for El Salvador? We either stop paying them the side money, somebody gives them more money to do something else, they go send them somewhere. But to answer your question, Mark, the court absolutely has that power. They tell somebody, you send a plane down there and pick those people up. And then they come in and they say, well, such and such an official down in Costa Rica, or not Costa Rica, El Salvador, won't cooperate with us. And I imagine that it escalates from there. The federal judge holds that person in contempt, demands that they make a response. When they say you have no jurisdiction over me, there's all kinds of laws on international human rights violations. I imagine the next thing by the plaintiffs would be that this was an international human rights violation by the authorities down there in El Salvador. And yes, they could not come to the United States. And I suppose the judge could issue a warrant. We could see how lawful that was. But you could see where the El Salvadoran officials don't want to play that game. Warrants for their arrest, not being able to travel outside of El Salvador, all of these headaches over this. So no, they're just doing Trump's bidding. This is, and the other one that I love in this whole thing is Homan. And Homan made two crazy statements on national TV.
He's sort of the deporter in chief, Homan. Yeah, go ahead.
He is the deporter in chief. And one thing he says is, I don't care what a federal court thinks. Now, I tell you, even when these authoritarian regimes came into power, you pick, the monster of history. They did not come into power saying, I don't care what the courts of my country think. It's just a startling, amazing statement that every right-thinking person should say, you have to get fired when you say, in our country with its checks and balances, I don't care what the federal courts think. You cannot be an official in the executive branch and say stuff like that. The other amazing one that he said on national TV when he appeared with Mayor Adams loved that appearance on Fox and Friends, when he said, we're watching you. We're going to be up your butt. I'm not making that up. we're going to be up your butt, Homan says, to make sure that you live up to your and deport these people. You allow ICE in there. And he said that on national TV. Could you imagine? It was like, I'm sure that after that, Mayor Adams said, I'd really rather not appear with that guest again, because he just called me out as being an absolute quid pro quoer. He called me right out in that comfy sofa right next to me. What a debacle. And yet his ship is coming in. If we have a minute to talk about it, Adam's ship may be coming in.
Well, sure. You can say, and then I've got some other stuff to talk to you about, but please go ahead. Yeah. So you're saying your old pal, Adam Schiff, go ahead.
Oh, not Adam Schiff. This is Mayor Adams. I wanted to talk about.
Oh, Mayor Adams. I would definitely, that's on an agenda item. Okay. We can get to it now if you want. Yeah. Explain to me what's going on there, because his charges were dismissed. Now, you'll have to explain with prejudice, without prejudice, and what that means.
All that with prejudice means is you can't bring it up again. Without prejudice means temporarily we're stopping, but if we find more evidence or if we feel like it, we can bring the charges back. Most times the government dismisses without prejudice, but this was really an anomalous case. So to include also Mayor Adams's narrative in this, he's the Brooklyn borough president, and he's got a lot of friends in the Turkish government, and he's really trying to help the Turkish government. A lot of the things that he got indicted for were not when he was mayor, but when he was Brooklyn borough president, to do favors for his friends in Turkey. He does so many favors for his friends in Turkey. He's flying around on Turkish Airlines. He's buying an economy fare ticket. He's living it up in first class on Turkish Airlines. He's going to Istanbul all the time. He's having so much fun that even when Istanbul isn't on the way someplace, he goes to Istanbul so he can fly first class in, stay at a 5-star hotel in Istanbul, kick back for a couple of days, and then go to someplace that's not even like, it doesn't make any sense geographically. On top of that, he puts pressure on the fire commissioner in New York City to open up the Turkish consulate to the UN. And supposedly it doesn't have proper fire clearance, but the Turks really want it opened up. And so he leans on the fire commissioner to give it a permit. And so for all of that kind of quid pro quo conduct, he is indicted in the Biden administration. His story is that he stood up to the Biden administration, and this is true, and said, stop sending all of these immigrants into New York City. We can't afford it. This is not a good policy. Do something about it. And there was kind of a group think in the Biden administration. It's coming really home to roost. We're seeing it now, that they appeared to not be doing anything about this flood of immigrants that was coming in, this record number of immigrants, one way or the other, that was coming in at a record number. And Americans were really getting tired of it. Right or wrong, it was becoming a toxic political issue for the Democrats. And now here's a Democratic mayor of New York who stands up and says, Biden, do something about it. We can't afford it. These people, we have to put them in camps out on some island and not let the kids play soccer or softball on those, these poor kids in New York City want to play softball and soccer, and their parents want to leave them there so they can go to work, and they can't do that because you sent so many immigrants in. So his story is that he was singled out and charged with this quid pro quo, and it's not exactly the crime of the century in political corruption. And so when Trump wins, he starts screaming to Trump, hey, do something about it, help me. He goes to the inauguration. He seems to be kissing Trump's butt, saying he's going to do more about this immigration situation. Maybe he'll allow ICE into New York City to go to places where in California we're not letting them go. And he becomes a favorite of Trump, such a favorite that Trump has this guy Beauvais. He's the very controversial deputy attorney general who says, you know what, we're going to dismiss the case against Mayor Adams, which is startling. I mean, the case was going to go to trial this summer and be a big deal in federal court. We're going to dismiss it, but we're going to dismiss it without prejudice, which means that we could bring it up again if we want to. And everyone said, oh, good. Now the Republican president has put a sword of Damocles over the Democratic mayor of New York City so they can control them just like a little puppet. And they can say to him, send ICE over here, whether people in New York City or the city council think it's a good idea or not. Do this task, do the other task. And they would have Mayor Adams as their little puppet because if he did anything they didn't like, they would bring up again the federal charges because it was only dismissed without prejudice. This all is seven different attorneys, some in the Southern District of New York Prosecutor's Office, some in the Public Corruption Section down in Washington, D.C., Mark, were told to file this paper with the court that said we're dismissing this case. 7 of them quit. A couple of them very noisily. This is not how the government operates. We bring cases because they're right or they're wrong. We have the law and the facts, or we don't. We don't bring them so that we can hold a sword over a public official's head or neck. And what happens, it lands in front of a judge named Judge Dale Ho in the Southern District of New York. And he says, I need a special counsel. I need to appoint somebody to tell me what's the other side of this story, because Mayor Adams is saying, this is the greatest thing that ever happened. They're dismissing the case against me without prejudice. I love it. And the Department of Justice finally has some lackey in court who's saying, this is a great idea. Why don't we do this? So the judge appoints another lawyer, hears from the other lawyer, and finally the judge issued a big decision the last day or two where he says, you can dismiss the case against him because you have executive authority to prosecute or not prosecute. Judges don't prosecute. We're the judicial branch. We don't prosecute. So there's nothing we can do about it. We can't appoint somebody to go prosecute somebody. That's not our system of justice. That would be like the European system, like a magisterial system where you're sort of prosecuted by the court. Can't do that. So we can't allow the prosecution to go forward, but at the same time, it's a violation of due process and the law to have this sort of Damocles. So this case is dismissed with prejudice, gone forever from the federal court. So if I can just do my little monologue for one more minute, Mark, I'll let you in, is that there's a couple of interesting things that could happen at this point. Some of them people may think are horrible. The government has, I think, 30 days to decide to appeal. I may not have the days exactly right. Within 30 days, the government could appeal and say, no, a federal judge does not have the power to dismiss with prejudice a case that we only want dismissed without prejudice. I think that's just too inside baseball, too fraught. I don't think the government is going to do that. So the day after they don't have time to appeal, the day after this judgment becomes final, I expect Mayor Adams to say, you know what? I did the right thing for the people of New York City. I stood up to the Biden administration. Maybe I stood up in a way that made Trump happy. I'm my own man. I'm independent. I want to be your mayor again. And I think he'll run on these tickets. There's not just Democrats and Republicans in New York. There's all these other tickets that are on the ballot. There's the liberals. There's the Green. There's the the conservatives, I think, have their ticket. So he'll get on as many tickets as he can. It may include the Republican ticket because he'll be the most conservative person who has a chance to win in the race. And it'll be him, Cuomo, and somebody who's probably quite liberal, because there are a lot of candidates in New York City who are quite liberal. That's how Mayor Adams won in the first place. He was sort of over on the center right, and a lot of people were over on the left, and he came out on top.
Well, that's a really interesting crew that you point to. Like, so you've got Cuomo, who resigned because of all the hugging and kissing. What did he say? I do hug and kiss. I mean, that was the high ground that he found. And then you have Adams, as you've just suggested.
I take full responsibility for my actions.
This is Cuomo.
I have been too familiar with people.
Yeah, there you go. So you're saying that guy may jump back into it will be just a rogues gallery.
In. No, yeah. Cuomo is in. Adams is going to try to stay in there. And they're going to run, I guess, in the Democratic primary, probably bet on Cuomo to win, right? Then Adams.
I do hug and kiss people casually.
Yeah, I mean, that's maybe he should make that put that on a poster. I do hug and kiss people.
I do hug and kiss people casually.
Right.
So Letitia James, who's the attorney general there, she's also gone after Trump. Won cases against Trump. She's a nemesis of Cuomo. And she produced in her case against Cuomo lots of witnesses who were going to say that he was way too familiar with female employees of the state. And he had to resign. But the fact that he had to resign, he never got prosecuted. He's doing his comeback. So, yes, it'll be Adams recently under federal indictment. Cuomo, he's also got the nursing home scandal.
During COVID, yes. Yeah.
Take their measure of that. And then, as I say, there'll definitely be a couple of candidates further out to the left. And it may be a three-way race, and who knows? Adams might actually pull it off.
The HHS secretary is RFK Jr., everybody. And there is now a major legal action. That's why I bring it up to Counselor Katz. 23 states and the District of Columbia suing the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services and the health secretary, RFK Jr., alleging the abrupt terminations of $11 billion in public health funding. They're saying that pulling the plug on that is harmful and unlawful. They filed this suit in federal court in Rhode Island, and apparently HHS unexpectedly ended a wide array of grants supporting immunizations, infectious disease tracking, mental health, and substance abuse services. The federal government justified the cuts by claiming that the funds were, quote, no longer necessary because their limited purpose had ended along with the COVID-19 pandemic. So the result of all of this is serious harm to public health, is what's being argued by these states through their lawyers. The Biden administration originally awarded the funds to bolster pandemic response and public health infrastructure. Of course, all of that is being torn asunder by the new administration. Can you speak to this legal challenge, David Katz?
Well, these are policy decisions on some level, and I wouldn't have made those policy decisions. I think that even a lot of people who voted for Trump wouldn't have made those policy decisions. But when you challenge them legally, the questions are more like, have they followed proper procedures? So one of the major challenges will be that they haven't done it properly under the Administrative Procedure Act, which requires notices, hearings. There's a lot of rules. So they're going to argue to the court that it's been done too hastily and they haven't complied with the Administrative Procedure Act. That's not the substance of whether it's good policy or not. That's sort of, did they dot their I's and cross their T's properly? And if it's sent back so they can dot their I's and cross their T's, sometimes there's a policy change, right? And so I'm hopeful that they win on that basis. And then, cooler heads prevail, saner people with the care of our public health prevail. Now they say on the merits of it that RFK Jr.'s claim that these were all pandemic related expenses. And now that we don't have the pandemic, the money doesn't have to be spent that way anymore. I think that gets into the issues that we've talked about with the separation of powers, that once the Congress has set up a program, only Congress can kill it. All of these efforts to hamstring these agencies and to really cripple them, to imperil their existence. So many of them seem to be different from what Congress allowed. When Congress set them up, they didn't have the idea that whole offices could be closed. There's some obviously adjusting that the executive branch can do, but all of these seem to be overreaches, and that's been challenged court after court. This one in Rhode Island, the other ones, a lot of the arguments are that Congress, number one, set up these agencies, and if they're going to be dismantled in a significant way, Congress has to do it, and that Congress approved a budget. And having approved the budget, those funds have to be spent and spent in the way that Congress said. The federal government, the executive, can't impound the funds or not spend the funds as part of executing the laws. They can't say, oh, we're going to execute the law, we're not going to do it. I mean, just common sense. That's not what executing means. So I think that that's where they are in this lawsuit. The plaintiffs are saying this money was intended to be spent, and it's not just pandemic specific. And of course, my argument to all of these things, which the Trump administration keeps losing, is that if they really believed they were right and they had the votes, they would go back to Congress. They control both houses. And they would say, you know what? I know we're dismantling AID. Give us approval, Congress. I know that we're getting rid of these programs at HHS that people say are so indispensable. Well, Congress, they aren't. They were just leftovers from the pandemic. Why don't you disapprove them? But of course, they never want to go that route. What they want to do is they want to shock and awe. They want to cripple the agency. They want to drive people out of them, have them get other jobs, give up. So this seems to be just another one. But this one is very scary, Mark, as someone who's a likely recipient. There's another pandemic.
Sure.
This one hits very close to home. I'm an older person. Thank God they did the vaccine they did the first time. Like everyone else, I was sitting at home and just praying that vaccine would come through and that it would work. And I'm praying even harder with RFK Jr. in there, cutting back, such a huge amount of HHS funds, CDC funds. They say the two people who know the most about bird flu were fired. They say the person who actually came up with that remedy that may have saved Trump's life, the person who came up with that remedy, he's been fired. So, and that was, I think, Dr. Kessler. I heard him on MSNBC last night saying that guy, remember, Trump was really, really sick. and he took some sort of miracle drug, not the one he hawked on TV that wouldn't have worked, but one that actually worked and that he took. That one was developed by someone who Trump has now fired. Did I mention he seems like a rather ungrateful human being, Trump?
Well, this is interesting because it sounds to me like they're really applying the playbook that they've used in this instance, which is, as you say, it's that shock and awe, fire everybody, discontinue it, and fight them in the courts. And the idea somehow is the court case will go on forever. Effectively, we've won because we fired everybody, we stopped the programs, we got what we wanted, and lo que pase, pase. Whatever happens in the court, you know, we'll just deal with that on down the way, but it'll be so far on down the way that we've really won the day. I want to ask you about the ICE agents on school campuses. There's something in California. They're going to try to pass a bill that aims to limit the presence of ICE agents on school campuses. Under the executive order from President Trump, my Lord and Savior, ICE is now allowed to target migrants at sensitive locations like schools and churches, and they can be arrested and deported from these places. So there's a new bill being sponsored by State Senator Elena Gonzalez, and it addresses some of these concerns, and it would essentially get rid of that potential. So you would have essentially those islands of safety associated with schools and churches.
I'm not so sure, Mark, how they would enforce it. But under Biden, and I think even to a large extent under Trump the first time, there were some limits on going to certain places, houses of worship. You can see why somebody would just say, you know, even a conservative, like the first Trump administration, they would say, you know what, we're not going to go Sunday services and pull people out of church, you know, on Sunday with their kids. Schools were another one. Schools are a particular problem because people won't send their kids to school if they're worried that they don't have anyone to pick them up, and that when they go there at 3 o'clock to pick up their kid, they're going to get arrested right in front of their kid, no less, right? So they won't send the kid to school at all because they're scared of that, and they don't have anyone else to pick them up from school. And then the state actually loses a lot of money. You know, we're one of the states that you get so much money per attendance, per pupil that's there in the class. And so it's a big financial drain on us with people not sending their kids to school. And of course, it's a huge disaster for the kids who don't get an education. But again, if mommy or daddy is so scared that when they pick the kid up at 3, they're going to get picked up by, by ICE, what's the choice? To have your kid orphaned in America for practical purposes, or go to school? Well, if it's really a risk of your kid being orphaned because they deport you out of the country, and that's a whole other issue. What are these kids supposed to do? You know, they're born here, they have that birthright citizenship, so many of them. So you've got these, 6, 7, 8-year-old American citizen kids. You deport their parent. It's like, would anybody think through this situation? I wanted to go back to your other point for just a minute, Mark, about the shock and awe and why I keep saying it's chaotic and why it's one thing to do it in a tailored way. They could say, we're going to fire those people in 2 months. And here's the reasons why. And then they could go to court. The reason they're getting these TROs all the time, and Trump jumps up there and says, oh my God, one judge is issuing a temporary restraining order. Well, if you say you're going to do something overnight or you do it the next day, of course, you're going to invite a lot of TROs. If you do it in an orderly way, it could be litigated in an orderly way. And you could even do your appeal in an orderly way. But that's not at all. You see, this is all performative. I shouldn't say all because it has huge consequences, all performative. So when you come back to the school situation, you wonder what ICE and what, let's say, California are going to do about it. Now, of course, the state, local authorities are famous for harassing people. When they want to harass people, they go by and see who's got a broken taillight, who's went through a stop sign. I don't know. Is the sheriff in LA going to sit there and see, do these federal guys go through stop signs? Because if they sit around the schoolyard, right, and they don't, not only don't help the feds, but they sit there and they wait for the feds to commit violations. Maybe they have a taillight missing. Maybe they go through stop signs. I mean, are they going to play hardball back? Because this really matters to the state of California. This is these kids who are growing up here. They're U.S. citizens. We want them to have an education. We want them to go to school. We don't want their parents to be so terrified that they're going to be arrested by or ensnared by ICE agents. This really matters to us. So I think the state of California and these other so-called sanctuary states, Trump wants to play hardball back. That's the way things are done in politics.
Well, at least this first legislative process may address a portion of it, but as you say, it's kind of as a practical matter, it's the Wild West.
What's the enforcement? What's the enforcement they have in mind?
Exactly. It's the enforcement, right. This quickly on from the comments, Chaplain Fred says, I'm so sorry, Marco, I'm going to disagree with Mr. Katz regarding the prisons in El Salvador. I'm a Jewish Salvadorian descent, and I can tell you that my family suffered because of the gangs. So I don't think David Katz said that the gangs aren't bad. I don't know. But here he says, thank you, Chaplain Fred, for a $50 super chat. Regarding prisons in El Salvador, yes, President Bukele is harsh, but families were victims of these thugs, and where was the human where were the human rights organizations when families were being murdered? I'm a Jewish Salvadorian, and my family suffered for decades. Interesting. It sounds like Chaplain Fred is saying, I'm glad that there are these prisons to wrap up so many of these gang members who've made life in El Salvador pretty horrible for many communities. But I think what we were talking about, and please, David, I'll let you speak here in a second, but I think what we're talking about is these witheringly awful prison conditions that end up ensnaring, because of the U.S. government and who they've sent there, people who are utter innocents, who are not the gang members to whom you've referred. Go ahead, David.
Well, I appreciate that he sent in those comments so that we can, kick them around. You can do a lot of things, but with due process. Here in America, we put people in prison for very long periods of time, much longer than a lot of countries. And we keep them in prison for a lot longer. But we do it with due process. Now, people attack various aspects of the system and so forth, but we do it with due process so that we don't have mistakes. We have this philosophy, and I agree with it, that it's better that 10 guilty people get off than that one innocent person goes to jail. So imagine this person who just wrote in, who's apparently here, his family have been victimized by Venezuelan gangs. If part of that victimization was that they involuntarily put a tattoo on him, he or one of his relatives could be in that Salvadoran prison right now. We have due process in order to prevent that from happening. And when they do make a mistake, any conscientious administration anywhere in the world corrects the mistake. They don't go to the courts and say, we can't do anything, it was a mistake, but we can't cure it. They cure it so that people have confidence in the legal system, and they have confidence that the people that we give so much power to, like these enforcement officials, that they're doing the right thing. And that when they do make a mistake, they correct it. Part of Trump's thing is like, I never made a mistake, I'm always right. No one is infallible. Everyone makes mistakes. If you own up to them, you're the bigger person. And Trump, of course, has never gone that way. His fans seem to like it. But I think the wheels are all coming off. I'm not the person to talk about tariffs. I'm sure you have guests to talk about that. But everyone's going to be paying a huge amount more money. You see Congress last night, the Senate last night, had the votes, Mark. They had the votes. They got Rand Paul, who's a libertarian, to go along with them. And they said, no, these tariffs on Canada, no, we don't agree with them. Stop them right now. These tariffs on Canadian products. Now, if they got the House to go along with them, that would be the end of it. There is a check and balance on the president's executive authority. People think, oh my God, he can just stand up there and put a 50% tariff.
Yeah, but the House won't even vote on it.
Well, people need to start pressuring their House members to say, look, we know very well that you agreeing to this, whatever it is, this agree. He can't do it on his own, the speaker. The speaker does it in the name of his 3 or 4 vote majority. And the swing voters there, the people who care about this issue, who are a lot of people. I mean, the Canadians are furious about this, and they have the right to be, and they're right there on the border with all these red states. So they need to tell people like these Republican senators in North Dakota, in Idaho, all of these, I think there's one in New Hampshire, they all border Canada. They're all getting Canada totally furious at us for no reason. They've done nothing wrong. They've just been our friends. They don't rip us off. It's supposed to be about fentanyl. There's a pound and a half. I could have in my vest pocket right now all the fentanyl that's come into America and been seized over the last months, Mark. This is a complete farce. So they're going to pressure the House, and I think the House is going to turn around, and the House is going to vote, at least as to Canada, I think fairly soon, that no, and they're going to get rid of the tariffs on Canada, because we're really getting into a colossal collision with Canada, and the senators and the House members don't want it.
I agree with you that they don't want it, but I disagree with you that the House will vote on it. In fact, Mike Johnson has already told them all to go home. I do not believe that Johnson will allow that vote. And so in the House, I think it will die. But I agree with you that all of them think this is ridiculous. This is they know the emperor has no clothes, but no one wants to say it.
Mark, let me say one last thing on this, because it's always great when we have this back and forth. Here's the reason that I think it's realistic, because they will be able to paint the fact that they are standing by this resolution to not vote on it as a vote for it. And it'll be like Senator Collins, who's one of the senators who voted against this. She pointed out that in northern Maine, there are over 500 jobs that people are going to lose. Mainers are going to lose 500 jobs pronto, because there's a pulp factory that brings the pulp from Canada, and then it's processed a few miles across the border in Maine. Those 510 people, and there'll be 510, 550 people in North Dakota, in northern Idaho, you name it. And when they get their layoff notices or realize they're going to be laid off, okay, it's not going to be like a Rachel Maddow demonstration. It's going to be the 550 people who just lost their jobs. 500 of them voted for Trump, and they're telling their congressman up there, their Congress member, okay, you get on the ball and get rid of these Canadian tariffs, because they're killing us. So I think the Canadian ones are going to go. And also the Republican senators are getting into a good swing. 4 of them voting with all the Democrats against Trump. And it's happening, Mark. It's happening. The wheels are coming off.
Well, I do believe that there are cracks in the foundation, so I will give you that. I might be a little early to say the wheels are coming off, but you can pick your metaphor, and then maybe that is the appropriate one. But I do think
Wisconsin vote, Mark, the Wisconsin vote, Florida being so close. Come on, a little optimism.
You're right, and I also think that the economy, sinking like a stone, will definitely change the cast, the light in Washington, and around these votes, there may be sort of just a different conversation. But it's really tough out there to push back against this president. Now, so on the House side, I just don't know if you'll see it. That said, you're right in the sense that if there's enough real-world pushback, maybe he'll allow them to cave on it. I think that the real-world pushback is not something that generally moves his meter, to be honest. So I guess that's where I am on it. We will see. We'll see. I do want to. We're kind of running out of time here, but I wanted to mention that another law firm sort of caved to Trump pressure. This is a Doug Emhoff's firm. The Doug Emhoff is the husband of Kamala Harris, right? Two more legal firms have reached agreements with Donald Trump to avoid executive orders that could significantly harm their businesses. The settlements come as many have expressed deep alarm at the U.S. president's effort to target law firms affiliated with his political rivals, and see the actions as a thinly veiled anti-democratic effort to intimidate lawyers from taking cases hostile to the administration. One firm, Wilkie, Farr & Gallagher, reached an agreement just this week on Tuesday with Trump, in which it agreed to commit $100 million, David Katz, in pro bono work to causes both the firm and Trump champion. Trump made this statement on Truth Social that those who've he triumphed. He declared this as a triumph, and then Kamala Harris's husband, Doug Emhoff, joined this Wilkie, Farr & Gallagher in January. Had told the firm it should not settle with Trump, according to published reports. But the firm also helped represent 2 Georgia election workers, Ruby Freeman and Shane Moss, who successfully sued Rudy Giuliani for more than $148 million. So you see, David Katz, in these specifics, how this is a political jihad that Donald Trump is on, and these firms cave. They just don't want to be on the wrong side of this guy. $100 million in pro bono work?
Well, this has gotten a huge amount of attention, of course, in the legal community, and then just more generally, because we haven't seen anything like this. This is truly unprecedented. And if you just have a couple more minutes, I think Emhoff will probably go to another firm. He's got a book of business, and he's got obviously a big name. He's second gentleman. Kamala Harris might be the governor. Who knows? She might run next time. She might be the president. So he'll have a lot of entree to a lot of firms. I think he has to make a statement with Wilkie Farr and Gallagher agreeing to do this, that he doesn't want to be a part of that firm. He'll take his book of business somewhere else. Someone has commented that the firms who are basically corporate and that do deals are the ones who have made these accommodations with Trump. So it's not that surprising. Wilkie Farr and Gallagher was a famous Wall Street firm that did a lot of deals, more so than they were known for litigation. That's probably also true of the other ones who made deals. Skadden Arps was a famous merger and acquisitions firm, and the money that they make on that is probably a lot greater than what they make on what you and I think of as litigation. And then Jenner and Block, Wilmer Hale, the ones who are actually fighting and litigating, people said, well, yeah, that's what they do more of. They're more fighters and litigators than they are deal makers. And, it's been done to intimidate law firms. It's been done so that law firms won't take on cases that Trump doesn't like. That's all true. But they're businesses. They're huge businesses. All the firms that we're talking about have over 1,000 lawyers. Some of them have 2,000 lawyers. They have even more thousands of support staff. The partners tend to make $5 million a year or so. Now, people say, you know what? They should be willing to make $3 million a year for the couple of years that Trump is in there. Even if that's what it ends up costing, Mark, let him make $3 million a year and not $5 million a year. And guess what? They decided in our capitalist system, and they're capitalists with law degrees, that they would rather make $5 or $6 million next year and not 3 or 4. And so it was to their benefit to settle. When you think of a law firm with 1,500 lawyers and what they bill, $100 million is not that big a deal. And to be absolutely honest with you, number one, they're going to have a pro bono program that costs them some money. So some of that money they're going to spend anyway. They're going to shift that over. If they were spending 30 million right now, they're going to count that 30 million toward the 100 million, and the other 70 million, the partner's going to charge $1,000 an hour. They're going to be 3 associates on every pro bono case. They're going to be charging $500 an hour. Before you know it, the 70 million left, Mark, it's gone before you know it. And these causes that they're going to be working on, they say they're going to help veterans. If Trump wants to help veterans, we don't need pro bono work done by Wilkie Farr and Gallagher. What we need is that he not cut back the VA.
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of straightforward. Kim asked a question about this off the air, and I thought I'd just throw it to you. She said, couldn't these law firms that have, capitulated, have surrendered to Trump in this way, the $100 million worth of pro bono, you also saw the $40 million, another firm, et cetera, pro bono, couldn't they just dog it on the legal work and not really work that hard and kind of, phone it in? Kim was wondering, isn't there a way, kind of a workaround in the moment? So you say you're going to help, you say you're going to represent for all these things, but the reality is you don't really do much in any kind of earnest way.
The thing about lawyers, they're very smart, they're very punctilious, and they do what they say they're going to do. The bills are going to be accurate. Now, did they really need to bring 4 associates along with a partner to the meeting? That's what clients complain about in the real world, that the bill is not made up, but it's padded in that sort of way, or there's unnecessary research or unnecessary time that's spent on cases. I've been doing this for 35 years, Mark, so I know a lot of issues. I don't look up, exceptions to the Fourth Amendment. And charge like 3 hours of time to look up exceptions to the Fourth Amendment. I charge 5 minutes for that and you get experienced lawyers. That's what's so wrong with this system, Mark. If you give me one more minute, I talked about this, that I was in Washington, D.C. when Carter went out of office and Reagan came in. And I was at the biggest Democratic law firm after I was a law clerk to a judge. I went to work for the biggest Democratic law firm in town, which was called Arnold and Porter. And we had a wonderful business, and nobody said, oh, you're known as a Democratic law firm. We, the Reagan administration, are in power. We never ran into that because we got cases that we knew all about. We represented Puerto Rico. We'd represented Puerto Rico for decades. We knew everything about Puerto Rico and what their problems were. Nobody said, wait, let's go find another lawyer who's going to get up to speed about Puerto Rico and all of its problems. Arnold and Porter knew everything about Puerto Rico. We knew everything about the cigarette industry. And so it was like, I'm sure somebody else would have loved to have had, R.J. Reynolds' business, But guess what? We had it, and they weren't going to send it to some Republican firm. And I think that right now, that's really the situation. There's so many experts who know so much about mergers and acquisitions. They know so much about this. And so in that sense, Mark, and I don't want to say it's being overemphasized. It's a big deal if they pick your firm. But I just, this idea of like profiles and cowardice and all these things that they've said about Paul Weiss and stuff like that. Paul Weiss made a business decision. It reminds me a little bit of like Amazon and the Washington Post, Bezos and the Washington Post. The guy made a business decision. He just did, and it's sort of predictable. And these law firms, when they take on these controversial cases, I'm sure they thought about it. Like when they took on this case for the two ladies against Giuliani. Number one, I think they got a big fee, although I don't know how much they really collected from Giuliani. They got a lot of publicity. And yeah, it's kind of,
it was the right side of that issue to be on.
Absolutely the right side. And the world isn't going away in 2 or 3 years. And Wilkie Farn Gallagher will be remembered forever for this decision. Paul Weiss will be remembered forever for this decision. They hold themselves up as this great trailblazer in civil rights. They don't look like such a trailblazer in civil rights now, do they? With agreeing to $40 million in pro bono for causes that they share with Donald Trump. So they took an institutional hit. But Mark, this is my last thought on this. All these law firms are the victims. The perpetrator, right, is Trump. The perpetrator is this thing. Yeah. And they've had this unleashed against them. And these law firms, none of these law firms deserve it. And they're all chosen because they did some controversial case that Trump didn't like. And the guy is just not big enough to say, this is what Reagan would have said. Reagan would have said, you fight your side of it, other side fights their side of it, we'll have a clash. That's why when people say Trump is like Reagan, at least from my recollection of Reagan, no, he's really not. That you got to be bigger than that. And I think everyone that we've had in office, even even some of the ones I disagree with, I think they were all bigger than this. They all got the fact that we'll get him next time. Trump doesn't have that. Yeah. He never, it's just like he tried to steal the election that had the coup on January 6th. He's never had that attitude, which is so American, which is, we had a good fight. And I'm going to get you next time.
No, he doesn't have that move. You're right. This from LJ. LJ says, Katz is the best guest on the Mark Thompson Show. He's not only very substantive, he's very engaging and entertaining. I agree. I love my David Katz. That's where we go along.
You have guests who won the Pulitzer Prize and who are nationally famous, so that's very very of them to say.
Yeah, you're in good company, but apparently for LJ,
I'm in my lane, but they're in some great lanes for other guests.
For LJ, you're a fave. David, appreciate so much your time and your thoughts, and I look forward to next week. Thanks for joining us today.
Kim and I rocked last Monday, Mark.
I know. I saw it. It was a special appearance. I liked it. I liked it a lot. She put up the bat beam and you responded.
We taped it at 11 p.m. the night before. And if anybody wants to look it up, I guessed the Wisconsin result. I'm taking some credit for that.
Oh, good boy. Very well done.
Musk said it was going to be 50-50. Musk said it was going to be so close you won't even believe it. And then, of course, Musk got involved. And so either his prediction was not good or he himself swung the votes 10 points against his side.
Yeah, he's not exactly the right.
10 points against his side.
There is Katzadamus, the artist's conception of Katzadamus as the sage that David Katz is. He correctly predicted the outcome of the Wisconsin election. And you're right. A lot of people were talking about the Wisconsin election for the Supreme Court in Wisconsin, but not a lot of predictions. You went out there. I give you a lot of credit.
And I was without my cheese head. I have a cheese head at home, but they don't last forever. You don't want to put on a 10-year-old cheese head.
That is true. All right, David, thank you. We'll see you next time.
Great
Dave Katz, everybody.
Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.